So can we read the 10th?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. All right. The 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people.
Which is why, post-foundation...
Just state power. So none of that is states establishing a religion.
Yeah, no,
this is just saying the federal government respects the state's right to make certain decisions. Like in suffrage, the state reserved the right to decide who is people, right?
How many states maintained a state religion post-constitutional ratification?
I believe all of them did initially.
Then what is your argument?
My argument is that the states are not America. The founding fathers
Then what is
are.
America?
Well, the founding fathers are probably a lot closer than what Maryland thought.
That's
right?
not Maryland. The states.
Yeah, well, Maryland,
the states would be all.
Is Maryland a state?
But yeah. All states is different than one state.
Sure, and yet all states felt that religion and church should be unified, that they should have a state religion, that there should be a test for religion, and the founding fathers knew that, and despite that, wrote it in explicitly that Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion and prohibit the free exercise thereof.
That way the states could do it, yes.
They were not saying what the states were going to do. They were saying America, which is federal.
Yeah, no, it's also state, which is why we have the 10th Amendment.
America is the federal government.
And state government.
So Maryland is America.
America's a state, or Maryland has a state government.
I didn't say that it didn't.
Great. And is that state government allowed to do all the things that the federal government can't do? That's not in the powers of the federal government via the 10th Amendment?
What matters more to what America
Now, what matters is answering my question. Is Maryland allowed to do whatever Maryland wants to do under the 10th Amendment as long as that's not in the hands of the federal government? As long as those aren't things which are allocated to the federal government, can Maryland do what it wants?
By and large, as long as it's not violating any of the Constitution.
So then, let each other finish, please.
Great. So if that's the case, then there was actually no reason at all why states could not have their own state religions, and they did.
So what do you think is more important for America? What a state did, like Pennsylvania, or what the founding fathers wrote into the founding documentation of the entire country?
The founding fathers wrote the 10th Amendment into the founding documents.
Yes, to respect the state's ability to make decisions.
Like have a state religion.
Sure, but also multiple things like commerce.
And also state religion.
Sure, but then they also explicitly prohibited at a federal level any involvement
of
a state religion. There's no federal religion. And
that's never been in dispute.
Yep, that has been in dispute because the question here is what's more American?
Yeah.
What Pennsylvania did in like the
that's
1700s.
Not the question. The question is whether Christian nationalism is un-American.
That's my question to you. What matters more for America? The American ethos, understanding America as a country, what Pennsylvania did at the founding of America, or what the American founding fathers wrote.
Both are important.
Which matters more?
Neither one of them matter more than the other.
They're equally valid. Equally matter.
The system wouldn't work without the validity of both state and federal government.
That's not what we're saying. You're saying that the Pennsylvania policies are equally as valid as the federal
under the 10th Amendment. Yes.
No. No. Hold on. You're equivocating again.
How?
You're being naughty because you're pretending like what we're talking about is now statecraft, that Pennsylvania policy was valid under the Constitution. But that's not what I'm saying.
What are you saying?
I'm asking you about the American idea, the idea of America.
The system.
What matters more to the history and understanding of America as a nation?
Both.
Which matters more?
That's
so you're saying they're equal.
When you say
Pennsylvania matters just as much as the founding fathers,
more or less,
which is fine. It's just absurd.
Absent, how is it absurd? The system doesn't work unless you have the state governments. It doesn't work.
That's not what anyone's saying. Nobody here is denying that.
So how could it be more important what the founders did when it was intricate that the states had the rights?
To America as an idea, I think what the founding fathers write kind of matters, like the most. Yeah.
Why?
Because they're founding the federal government. They're founding
based on a compromise with the states.
Yeah, but they're founding a nation.
Based on the states.
But the nation is not Pennsylvania. The nation is America.
The nation is a collection of states.
So why is it the case that if all the states had all these religious practice and all these religious law, why didn't the federal government, if they wanted to unify them, why didn't they just write in, that America is a Christian nation? Why didn't they do that?
Because you had what was called pan-Protestantism. Each one of these states had different religious organizations in them. And some of them wanted to be this type of Protestant, some wanted to be Catholic, some wanted to be Quakers. So they gave them the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment said that they could do that shit. They could be a Protestant state.
Why
they
not
could
just
be a
say they have to be
Catholic state.
Christian? Why not just say at the federal level that they can just be the Christian?
Because the states demanded that the federal government not step in to tell them what their state religion had to be.
That's not true. Actually,
That was the compromise.
No, so when
yes,
the first,
yes,
no,
it was.
So
Yeah.
no. Hold on. The
Okay.
compromise here is that states are allowed to make certain rules of law within state that don't that are not within the federal purview. That is the compromise, right?
No.
Yes.
That's one compromise.
Okay. Okay. I don't know why you're interjecting there at all. Thank
Because
you
it
for the
matters.
clarification. This is like being like, there's 3 ways of feminism, and I'm like, there's 4, and you're like, 3's within 4. It's like, okay.
No,
thank
it's
you.
nothing like that.
It's
It's like saying
identical to
this. It's like saying the states, the reason that this compromise happened in the First Amendment is because a Catholic state didn't want the federal government to tell them they had to be a Protestant state.
So why didn't they
But
just have
they did
Christian?
want the federal government to say that they could have a Catholic state, and they did under the 10th Amendment.
So why is it the case that within like the first federal address, all of the states were extremely upset because they mentioned nothing about God? There was no establishment of America as a nation of God. There are ways, for example, that they probably could have compromised between all of the religions so that it wasn't saying a Catholic leader, but just saying a Christian leader, right? They could have done that, but they didn't do that explicitly
That's
to
because
the
they-
upset, actually,
Yeah.
to the upset of the religious leaders, to the
It's
upset
true.
of some of the founding fathers.
It's because
So why did they do
because
that?
Protestants didn't consider Catholics to be Christians. That's why.
That's not why.
It is why.
No, the TJ writes about this. The reason why, right, and you have this in the Federalist Papers, the reason why is because they were breaching away from a king who was also a spiritual leader, right, in the UK, and they had a huge issue with it. They viewed this blend of church and state, especially at a federal level, as a problem. In fact, I suspect if you go into it, a lot of the founding fathers thought that all the states shouldn't have a state-level religion. They just weren't going to comment on that because they needed to unify the countries.
Incorrect.
And over time,
There was
the
a
colonies
couple-
adopted the exact same
Yeah,
framework
there was
that
a
the founding
couple
fathers
of
had.
them
If you
that
can,
didn't
just
want
try
to.
to let each other
So
finish.
first of all, there was a couple of them who didn't want to. That's true. But the thing is like
Well, they all
the
agreed to it.
entirety of the federal government. Well, I'm talking about there was a couple of founders who didn't want states to have a religion. That's what I'm specifically
You're talking about the
referencing.
deists.
Not just the deists. There was others who weren't deists, but by and large, most of them were fine with the compromise.
So a majority of the founding fathers-
Is it my turn now? So here's what actually happened, because since you have revisionist history that I don't know where you came up with.
Okay.
You couldn't say in the First Amendment that this is to be a Christian nation specifically, unless you gave a specific denomination, because denominations did not recognize other ones as being Christian. So what they did instead was they said, look, Congress is not going to make an establishment of a religion, period. We're going to leave that to the states. And then they put in the 10th Amendment. And that's exactly what the states did. They put in their own religions.
Why could they have? So why did they ban religious test clauses? You could easily make religious test clauses.
They still have them in almost every state.
Finish, please.
No. At a federal level, it's Article 6. It's
Yeah.
explicitly banned. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States.
Because there could be instances where you had people who were representatives of states who, for some reason, needed to operate at the federal level, right? They didn't want to be like, hey, you're a Catholic, so your oath is no good here. Or you're a Protestant, so your oath is no good here. Or you're a this, so your oath is no good here. That was part of the compromise.
Why didn't they just use the Apostles' Creed? Both Protestants and Catholics at the time acknowledged the Apostles' Creed.
Because they didn't recognize each other as Christians. So the
That
compromise...
doesn't matter. They both recognize it. The Apostles' Creed isn't Catholic or Protestant. It's just Christian, right? Whether or not they would fight about who's a heretic or not. Why not, if you want a religious test clause that compromises between these two religions, why didn't they just write in the Apostles' Creed? I'm sure they were familiar with it.
Because they didn't recognize each other as Christians. Meaning, at the
That doesn't
federal level,
matter.
if you swore in as a Catholic, let's say, right, in order to, I don't know, help with some piece of legislation or do something that you weren't, you were supposed to do at the federal level, the Protestant nations or states might be like, we don't recognize that because that's an oath of a Catholic. So at the federal level, they
Do you
had to
think
stay
Protestants
secular.
would have said that the Apostles' Creed is Catholic?
What does the Apostles' Creed have to do with anything we're talking about?
The Apostles' Creed is like one of the central creeds to like what we say
So
who's
what?
Christian.
So what? That has nothing to do with what I'm saying.
Of course it does. Why would you said if a Catholic takes the Apostles' Creed
Why
test,
I don't
why would a
understand.
Protestant be
Why
upset
did the
about
federal
that?
government, it was not within the federal purview to make the determination of getting the states to compromise on the Apostles' Creed. It was under their purview to say, hey, what we're going to do is make it so that you don't have to swear any oaths from the Catholic or Protestant perspective, but rather we'll leave that to the states. The states can make it so that you can swear that you're a Protestant, or you can swear that you're a Catholic, or you can swear this, or you can swear that. It was up to the states prospectively under the 10th Amendment.
Right. But at a federal level,
Yeah.
it was barred. And you're
So-
saying there
and
isn't a world.
nobody's disputing that.
Hold on.
We just like going in a circle.
We can keep going in the circle, but I'm not going to let this point go because I think that one of the issues is that what you're trying to do is say, well, because the states had this rule, that means that was the founding of America. And it's like, no, the founding fathers knew that this existed, knew, for example, the Apostles' Creed existed. And despite all of this, despite the standard of all of the states utilizing a religious test, they rejected. Not only did they reject it, they explicitly wrote it in Article 6 that no test can be utilized, despite the fact that the founding fathers were pretty smart. I imagine if they wanted a religious test in there that could satisfy both Protestants and Catholics, they probably could have found it, like the Apostles' Creed.
So your whole position is, why didn't the founders try to find some way that all of the different religious denominations could agree to some creed and enshrine it in the First Amendment? That's your argument?
My argument would be if they wanted a blending of church and state, they were pretty intentional to go out of their way to ensure there was no blending of church and state.
Except they gave the states the 10th Amendment so that they could blend the church and the state.
They can't tell the states what to do. That was part of the colony deal.
No, that's my point.
But at a federal level, they went above and beyond to explicitly bar this.
They went above and beyond to make the compromise that each single state could have their own religion if they wanted it, and the federal government wasn't going to tell them what that had to be.
Religious clause, would not.
Yes.
Would
that
not.
way, that was the compromise. Federal government can't tell us what our religion's going to be.
Why are you
And
that?
the feds were like, okay, we could do that.
Do you think the founding fathers were like maybe a little bit thoughtful and intentional, that they like worked pretty hard to figure out the compromises?
Some of them were lazy, womanizing pieces of shit. But what's the point?
They could be womanizing, and also
what is your point?
My point would be that if they wanted a religious test clause that could unify the religions, they probably could have found one that would have worked, because they found a whole bunch of other compromises.
What would it be?
The Apostles' Creed is one good example.
And, okay, did Quakers follow the Apostles' Creed?
Yes, I believe the Quakers follow the
Did
Apostles'
Mormons?
Creed. I believe Mormons also follow the Apostles' Creed, yes.
Really?
Yes.
Let's find out if Quakers follow the Apostles' Creed. Can you look it up? Look up if Quakers follow the Apostles' Creed. Let's find out.
Do you know what the Apostles' Creed is?
Are we pop quiz, Kyla?
Well,
Pop quiz, Kyla?
are you saying you don't?
Yeah. Most Quakers do not formally use or recite the Apostles' Creed. Really quick before...
Hold on.
Really quick. We're coming up on the hour. Would you guys like to shift to a new prompt here in a few minutes, or?
Yeah, but...
So you're telling me that they don't acknowledge the Apostles' Creed, or are you saying that they don't believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, that he died and rose again?
Kyla,
That's the Apostles' Creed.
they don't recognize it.
That's the Apostles' Creed.
That's it.
So
They don't recognize.
Hold on.
I do have a bit of more information here. It says many Quakers, especially in more evangelical branches, would agree with much of the theology in the Apostles' Creed. However, they generally do not recite it in worship or require
Reciting doesn't matter.
Require members to affirm it. I don't know if that changes.
So
it.
as long so that wouldn't have been a unifier.
How would that not have been a unifier?
Because even if they theologically think it's sound, they're not going to recite the Apostles' Creed.
No. That's not what they said. They didn't say they won't say it. It said that they don't require people to say it, which is not the same thing. I'm not talking about a catechism. I'm talking about a
Your
theology.
entire argument is, why couldn't the founders find some compromise that every single independent Protestant, pan-Protestant religion could agree to for some kind of creed for oaths?
My argument is that if
That's
the founding...
the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Here's what they did instead. They went, we're just not going to legislate any sort of formal religion on your states, and you can do that instead.
Classic Andrew, it's just absurd.
That's an actual absurd position.
It's not absurd. The founding fathers were pretty smart guys. I think that they could think about things. They wrote a lot. I think if they wanted to blend church and state intentionally, they would have done so.
You guarantee
but instead,
me?
hold on, but
go ahead.
instead, they explicitly wrote into the Constitution that they would not do so federally, and over time, all states agreed with that and wrote out religious clauses.
What was the 10th Amendment for?
I don't know.
Okay.
We just hit the hour mark. Shall we?
Do you want to tell me?
Shall we switch prompts?
The thing we've been talking about for the
Yeah,
last...
well, I assumed that you were going to give me more information about it.
What do I need to give you more information? You don't even know what it is. It's silly to say that you think that the founders should have found some way that every single independent pan-Protestant religion would find some kind of unifying creed they would all just suddenly agree to, rather than them just saying, we're just not going to impose any religious standards on states. You guys can do it yourself.
Yeah, I think that if the founding fathers actually believed that the merging of church and state was important, they would have found a way to write it into the Constitution.
They did via the 10th
They
Amendment.
did not.
They did.
No, allowing states to have choice and purview is not the same thing as writing.
Were states allowed to make their own religions or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with, for example, saying that the church doesn't get a hand in statescraft, which is written exclusively into the
Only at the
1A.
federal level.
Yes.
Because they didn't have a unification for things like oaths and other things that all the pan-Protestants would agree to at the federal level.
They just couldn't think of any. They were like, man, we really.
They argued
Hold
about
on.
it nonstop.
This is your premise. This is your premise. The founding fathers actually really wanted to write in the merging of church and state. It was
No, they
something
didn't.
that they really cared about.
At the federal level, they didn't.
But they couldn't find a way to federally write
is
these
she
things in
talking about?
together. And so, don't interrupt me. And so instead, what they did is they wrote it out and they just let states do, so they could sneakily blend in their blurring of church and state. That's your argument.
Truly, your
Yes or no?
intellect
Is that your argument?
is dizzying. No, my argument is that
Are we getting personal?
That the founding fathers.
Are we getting personal? Because you said no personal when we started this. Do you want?
Wait a second.
You said my intellect is dizzying.
Yeah, you can call me stupid. So the thing is like, I am so curious about this. I actually don't even understand this.
I just want to be
position
clear
now.
that we're breaking the rules
So
of
the
decorum by your
federal
standards.
government, was that really harsh? Like, truly your intellect is dizzying?
I would
that's
say,
harsh.
I would say in
that's
general.
a movie line, by the way.
I would say in
from the
general
Princess
that if
Bride.
we want to have a good engagement back and forth, we, for example, agreed to things like not getting personal.
That's not personal. It's from the Princess Bride. It's a joke.
So you only meant it as a joke. You weren't trying to call me stupid.
Well, this position's stupid.
Are you calling me stupid? Because when you say my intellect is dizzying, it feels like you're saying
it is dizzying.
So you think
but
I'm
the
stupid?
thing is here, I don't get.
I don't know why you wouldn't just
is
own
like-
that you're insulting me.
is
This
like
is so
you
crazy.
you go, wait a second, Andrew. It would have been way better for the pan-Protestant and Catholics at the federal level for them to somehow agree on some kind of
Didn't say better.
unifying creed.
Didn't say better.
Or make more sense that they would agree to some sort of unifying creed, even though Protestantism can also change. You can have like a new denomination which pops up that doesn't agree with this. And so they're like, wait a second, instead of doing that, what we'll do instead is we'll leave it up to the prospective states, and then they can impose
Because
whatever religion.
we
Hang on,
secretly
Kyla,
want
calm
the
down,
blending
Kyla,
of church
calm
and
down,
state.
Kyla. I just want to finish.
Okay.
Okay. The states can blend and always were able to blend church and state. Yes.
And yet the federal level can't and doesn't.
That
and
was
so,
never in question.
So what is in question here is, by your logic, the founding fathers,
Yeah.
they actually secretly wanted the church and state to be blended, but they couldn't write it in because the Christians...
Where did you get that?
Your argument.
I never argued that.
This is the implication of
It's
your
not
argument.
even the implication
of
of
course it is.
it.
You're saying that actually the founding fathers, they did want the blend of church and state. Do you think that?
They wanted the states to be able to blend
Do you
church and
think
state.
that the founding fathers wanted America to have a blend of church and state? That they wanted the church
it
to
depends
help
on which
make
ones you're
state
talking
practice?
about. Some of them did.
You
Some
said
of
the
them
majority.
didn't.
You said the majority of founding fathers.
No, the majority of the founding fathers who signed, I said, were not deists.
You
That's
also
what I
said the
said.
majority of them
Yeah.
were like some
Foundational Protestants.
Yeah,
yes.
they were men of God,
and
right?
from different denominations.
And do you think that those men of God
Mm-hmm.
couldn't have tried to, like, if they wanted to write in
Mm-hmm.
that the federal government has a blending of church and state, that they couldn't have found a way to possibly do that?
Or they just give it to the states prospectively, which makes more sense
Why would they then explicitly write it out of the federal government?
because they wanted it to go to the states specifically, so that for purposes of things like oath keeping and
Why would
things
they
like
make
this.
a rule then that says states must maintain some form of Christian religion?
Because that doesn't mean anything. If you say you have to be a form of Christian,
How does that not
who
mean
gets to make the determination of who a Christian is?
Usually it's going to be the Christian people of that state, right? How does
Exactly.
Wait,
That's my whole point.
It's not
Exactly.
your whole point. It's not your whole point.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
If the founders, if at the federal level they can't make a determination of who a Christian is or isn't, and that's why you leave it up to the state determines.
So by your implication, you're saying the founding fathers did actually want church and state to not be separate. However, they couldn't find a way to write it into the Constitution other than through the 10th Amendment, which doesn't even
You're
talk
getting one
specifically
whole
about...
part of this
Don't interrupt
wrong.
me. Don't interrupt me. You can correct me after. Just write it
Okay,
down.
go ahead.
Okay, so you're saying the founding fathers By implication, they actually did want the church and state to be blended. They actually valued that, because you're saying that they wrote it into the Constitution by allowing the states to do it, which is implying then that the founding fathers did want church and state to be blended. They just couldn't write it in within the First Amendment clause, so they allowed the states to do it as a sneaky way to smuggle in church and state.
This is like the worst straw man ever. No, here's my actual position. The actual position is, due to the Articles of Confederation and that not working, we knew that we needed to have a federalist nation. Otherwise, we couldn't have currency, a standing army, anything like this. Because of that, the states, who were completely distrustful of having a federal government because they had just fought off a massive kingdom, were very distrustful. And so they needed to sell it to them. The way that they sold it to them is they were like, well, since it's all pan-Protestantism, we can't figure out our foundationalism. We will take a secular approach at the national level. And what we'll do is institute the 10th Amendment, and each of you can put in your own religions if you want to. That was the compromise. It has nothing to do with the motivation of the founders at the federal level, wanting it, not wanting it, loving it, not loving it.
Of course
it has
this
to
is
do.
my argument.
Okay, that's great. But you just said what you're saying is, which infers that's my argument, and it's not. My argument is there's a compromise between the states and between the feds. And the compromise was that the feds were not going to tell the states what religions they could or couldn't have, period.
And was the compromise, why are the fathers, were the founding fathers compromising? Because they had a hope that the church and state would stay connected, they just couldn't write it in? Is that what you're saying?
At which level?
So they were hoping that the nation broadly would stay Christian within the statecraft, that there would be no separation of church and state. However, they couldn't write it in.
No, they wanted at the national level to adhere to the idea that only the states could impose whatever their religious value structures were.
I'm asking, is it more reasonable to conclude that the founding fathers wanted a separation of church and state, or that they did not want a separation of church and state?
You have to express at which level.
I'm assuming that if they felt it at the federal level, they probably felt it at the statehood level. I don't know why a founding father would be like,
Jefferson,
I don't want it at the state level, but I actually do. You said compromise, right?
Jefferson didn't like that states had religions, and he made that clear. But other presidents made it clear that they were fine with it.
So the majority of the founding fathers, do you think that they wanted separation of church and state?
At the national level, that was the compromise, yes.
Do they want it, though?
I don't know. I can describe to you each of their motivations.
What's your presumption?
Some of them did, and some of them didn't.
Do you think most of them did, or most of them didn't?
I don't know if it's most. Do you?
You said a majority of the founding fathers. Well,
weren't
I would
deists.
say...
I said weren't deists.
No, you also said that they were loyal Protestant, good old Christian
true.
boys.
They were.
So my argument would be that these good old Christian boys all agreed that separation of church and state mattered. That's why they wrote it into the Constitution.
At the federal level.
They didn't even prescribe states having a state religion. They just didn't take the states right.
That was the compromise.
They just didn't take the states right away from them doing so. That's not the same thing.
So they allowed the states to implement their own religions.
At a state level, but they would not at a federal level.
Then what are we arguing here?
We're arguing about whether or not the founding fathers wanted a separation of church and state or not.
At the federal, I don't know how else to make
Why
this
would
clear.
they want it not at the federal level?
At the federal level, they did not want a federal religion because states got make a religion.
Why didn't they want a federal religion?
Because they were compromising with the states.
Sure, but do you think that overall, if they didn't have to compromise, they would have preferred a federal religion?
Well, there wouldn't even, the whole framework of the nation would be so different. I don't even know how to speculate.
You're right.
On
it would be completely different America if we didn't have separation of church and state, because the founding fathers, despite mostly being Christian, despite being loyal Christians, they understood the necessity of separation of church and state. Most of those founding fathers,
America, because there wouldn't then be states' rights, the 10th Amendment. There wouldn't be, the whole system would be totally different.
We're 10 minutes over.
So I don't have any idea what you're even referencing.
If you want to rewrite absurdism into it, that's totally fine. But it's pretty obvious that if the founding fathers wanted to have no separation of church and state, they could have done something. They could have employed in some direction.
I don't even know what she's arguing.
How about this?
You could steel man me and try.
Over time on this prompt.
You seem to be saying that
you guys want to do.
Was it the
I don't know.
Was it the motivation? If it was the case that there was no states, would the founders have preferred no religion?
So I've made already an affirmative claim, which I said, well, the founding fathers, despite being dominantly Christian, despite valuing their Christianity, despite most of the nation being either Protestant or Catholic, went out of their way to write religion out of a federal nation, grounding America at a nation level as a non-religious nation state. In fact, so non-religious. So non-religious.
Here's the problem.
Hold on, I'm not done.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you guys want to continue on this prompt, or do you want to move on to something else?
I just want to speak to that specific thing you said. That's kind of one of my issues with Andrewism is you're not attempting to understand what I'm saying in any way. And usually
I just tried to steel man and you cut me off. When I was trying to steel man your position, you cut me off.
I corrected you because you were steel manning me incorrectly.
Okay, got it. So here's the thing.
Well, if you're going to steel man me, you should probably be correct.
Can we agree
and in
to
a good faith conversation, I want to understand you, and you want to understand me. So let me summarize your position.
Okay, go ahead.
My understanding of your position is that you don't know. You're agnostic as to whether or not the founding fathers wanted, church and state to be blended, but you believe that essentially they allowed the states to do it so that the states could stay religious, and they wrote it at a federal level because they recognized that they would have to compromise, and they couldn't find a good compromisation amongst the states because they're of different religions, correct?
No.
How is that incorrect?
Well, the first part is what you're messing up.
Okay.
It's irrelevant whether or not the signers of the Constitution themselves would have ascribed for a state religion or not.
I think the founding fathers' predilection is important.
What's relevant is what they actually did with the states. The state itself, the prospective states, are as much of import as the federal government. That's what anti-federalists thought. You have a federalist mindset for some reason. You keep on, I understand the disconnect. The disconnect is you keep thinking that federal systems are more important than state systems.
No.
They're definitely not.
Let them finish.
Hang on. Not only are they definitely not, but that's where the disconnect is. Here's what's actually happening. There was a compromise that was done. The compromise was that there was no possible way that Catholics over here were going to recognize the oaths of Protestants over there. Not if the federal government was making the demand that you had to be X thing in order to swear an oath or do a thing. So what they did instead was they said, what we're going to do is we're not going to implement a nationalized religion. The prospective states instead are going to be able to implement whatever religious institutions that they want. They were perfectly fine with them blending church and state. Yes, perfectly fine with it.
Do you think they preferred it?
Many of them, yes.
So why didn't they write it into the federal constitution?
I don't know how else to explain it. Like I
so
actually
you're just
don't.
saying
I don't even know how to explain it.
Maybe a prompt switch. Maybe a prompt switch. I think we should probably do.
I want to clarify two things. I want to clarify.
Maybe a prompt switch could be good.
Maybe sure. The issue is, I don't know if you want to have a good faith conversation or not. It seems like the answer is no, because in a good faith conversation, we're both trying to understand the most coherent version of one another's opinions. We're trying to actually understand.
Then why did you just explain it to me when I just explained it to you?
What?
You said, then explain to me why they did that. And I'm like, I just explained to you why they did that.
So again, then I was going to say my next argument against that.
Yeah.
Right? Which is that you're telling me that the founding fathers and all of their intelligence and all of their battling and their ability to do so much, like found America, they couldn't figure out a way to compromise amongst the religions if they actually all dominantly preferred a blending, a church and state blending. They just couldn't figure that out.
They did find a way to do that.
So you're saying they actually did do that sneakily through the 10th Amendment?
It wasn't sneakily, it was upfrontally.
Why wouldn't they just write that in the First Amendment? Why would the First Amendment bar the union of church and state?
Because
if they wanted at a federal level,
they could have. At the federal level, what they did was they said, okay, we're not going to implement any religiosity on independent states. We're not going to do that ever.
Why?
Because each independent state gets to have their own religion as part of the compromise that they made with the federal government due to the Articles of Confederation. There's no or.
Yes.
There's no or.
The or here is the more reasonable assumption. The founding fathers wrote in an explicit separation of church and state at a federal level because that's what they wanted. They understood that when you blend church and state, it corrupts not only the nation, which they had just separated from a corrupted nation that was utilizing statecraft and religion, and they recognized that it also corrupted the religion, which there was many issues with the corrupted religion of the Anglican and then Catholic and then Anglican British church.
No, that's not what happened.
Okay.
What happened, first of all, they had not just done this, okay? They had the Articles of Confederation first. That happened first. And what happened is they were just not able to govern because each state was like a mini kingdom, and they wanted their own currency and their own militaries. Okay, and so for the common defense, they wanted to have some sort of federalism in order to do this.
Did they unify under one currency?
That was one of the primary reasons they wanted unification was because of a currency.
So why couldn't they unify under one religion?
Because what you wanted to have trade between each state.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about their religions, this was pan-Protestant. So there was no unification there.
So they were willing to unify on a whole bunch of stuff, but they just couldn't, for the life of them, figure out a way to unify the religions, because they actually did want the church and state to be blended. They wanted the church to have weight and say on statecraft. They just couldn't write it in at the federal level, so they just let states do it.
Well, who's the church?
The church would be the Christian church.
Who?
The Christian church.
Who's that?
The Christian church.
Who?
There's multiple branches of it.
Oh, there are?
Yep.
Okay. So because of that, were there multiple branches which had different states they were in?
Probably to some degree, although I imagine a lot of states mostly had a lot of everything. I suspect that a lot of states had
A lot of them had a
Protestants.
lot of one thing.
Really?
Really.
Okay, so there was just like the Quaker state,
I mean, it was mostly brought up like
the
that.
Mormon
yeah.
state, but it didn't.
There was some.
Was there a Mormon state?
Delineation, but no. So
Was
the
there a
thing
Mormon
is,
state?
no. So the thing is like, look, when you look at it, because of pan-Protestantism, each state independently is going to have their own religion. That had nothing to do with them being able to coordinate trade under one currency.
So say if one of those states happened to be Muslim, do you think that they would have been like, woo, they get to have their own religion? Do you think that would have been okay? Or?
No, I don't think so. No.
So they did want a Christian nation.
Well, no, I think that they were banking on white immigrants not being.
Sure, but they probably did want a Christian nation, and they had some feelings about the Catholics.
Well, they
and
really.
the
I
Protestants,
think that
but they recognized that they were more united
I
than
think
say
that they
pagan
just thought
religions.
that most of the immigrants coming in would be Western Europeans, and so not Muslims.
Gotcha. So they had no. So, but say the founding fathers did have an expectation that a branch or a sect of paganism was about to be popularized in America.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be okay with the state just being some pagan religion, some Nordic pagan religion that a bunch of these white Europeans were appealing to.
There wasn't. I don't even think that at that time they could have even envisioned
Sure.
that.
Hypothetically, though, if there was, would they have been okay with that?
I think that I don't think there would have been a state-federal compromise if that was the case.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Because I think that the states would have been like, we're not going to allow a state.
So the federal government would have imposed a religion on them, except
They wouldn't have imposed a religion necessarily.
wait, they didn't do that. In fact, the federal government explicitly wrote that out.
That would make my point.
That would make my point.
How would it make your point?
Because if the federal government wouldn't be okay with a Muslim government, then
Yeah.
they probably should have written in that you have to be a Christian government in some way. They probably could have found something connected amongst all the Christians to ensure
They just did
that
it
the
through
states could be
racialism.
Okay.
Yeah, what does this have to do with the fact that you still haven't acknowledged that the whole reason that there was this compromise which happened and that the federal government said, from our perspective, we're going to leave this up to the states via the 10th Amendment, is literally because they wanted to allow the states to put in whatever religious institutions
But
they
also
wanted.
theoretically, no religious institutions, right? The Federalists.
No, they weren't. They
So the
didn't
federal
have the
government-
purview to tell the states that.
Yeah, so the federal government would have been opposed. Is that what you're saying? They would have actually been opposed to a secular state. Like if a state just got rid of all of the religious clauses that it had, would that be okay?
Under the purview of the 10th Amendment, states could do that.
Yeah, you're right. It's
And?
almost like the founding fathers didn't care about blending church and state. They actually cared about separation of powers. So if you want to ask me about the suffrage stuff, the reason why the suffrage stuff is relevant is because when they were talking about voting is really important as far as like stakeholders. This is what Hamilton and Madison talk a lot about, right? The voter
Okay.
has to be somebody with a high stakeholder in the country. And they were constantly afraid that votes could get utilized in such a way that select interest groups could tyrannize other interest groups, right? Which is why they had lots of separations of power, like the separation of church and state.
At the federal level.
Which they cared a lot about.
At the federal level.
You're right.
The thing not in dispute.
Yeah, so when we're talking, so the thing that's in dispute here is I'm saying America and the founding fathers wanted a separation of church and state.
At the federal level.
Yep.
So what?
I think the federal level
was
is pretty important.
never in dispute.
Is America important? Is America federal?
It's both.
So what matters more when we're talking
There
about
is
like
no
federal
more.
policy?
The system completely doesn't work unless you have both
Does
state
the federal
and
government have hierarchy over the state?
No.
Yes, on everything that the
No.
federal government has decided has hierarchy over
yeah,
the state.
so the federal government has hierarchy over the state. Over everything, the federal government has the powers of hierarchy over the state
has
with.
decided to have power
So by that
over.
same logic, does the state have hierarchy over the federal government?
No, because if the federal government, for example, decided to overimpose on the state, they would fight it in courts. But technically, the federal government has rule. It's obviously
No,
yes.
that's not the case. That's not even how the system works. The states, prospectively, can override the federal government on all sorts of issues. When it comes to the 10th Amendment, that's what it's there for. That's the separation of powers you're talking about.
Yeah, it's
what
one
you
of the
just said was
separations of powers.
incoherent. If it's the case that you say the federal government, yes, they have authority over the states based on everything they have the authority over the states with. It's like, sure, but the same thing applies to the state. What you're talking about, when you say more or less important, that's not even a coherent question. That wouldn't even be the same system. It would be a completely different system.
So if the federal government decides to go to war and draft people, can the states do anything about that?
Under current law, I don't think they can.
Okay, gotcha. And if the federal government, for example, decided to send the National Guard into Minnesota, have they been able to do that?
Only to federal buildings, yes.
Well, there's more than that, but yeah.
No, where?
The National Guard has been set in to just control riots generally across
When?
California. I mean, this year.
Only to federal buildings.
I mean, they go into crowds and disperse crowds like outside.
In front of federal buildings.
Okay, gotcha. So the federal government just can actually impose into a state.
On federal property?
In like limited ways, yeah, of course.
Can the federal government go occupy the state building?
No.
Okay, then what the fuck are you talking about?
I'm talking about a hierarchy of two things. Number one, the American ethos.
Yeah.
Right? This is where we all started. I was saying the American ethos is life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, ingenuity, creation, right? All these things.
Yeah.
And you said, where is that? And I said, well, in the Declaration of Independence is a start, and what the Founding Fathers valued.
No, I
is
didn't
a
say
start.
where is it. I said what is it.
You also said where.
Yeah, what is it?
And okay, I'm not quibbling.
What is the philosophy of it? And you still haven't told me.
Well, you still haven't told me what an Irish ethos is. Because all these things are circular.
Well, I did.
Well, the liberty is the foundational piece.
Yeah, so you're just so liberalism is just a referent back to a system. And if it's just a referent to a system, and I can change the First Amendment.
Well, liberalism is a system with a collection of
and I can change the
values.
system within the confines of liberalism, you shouldn't have an objection. Because if I can change the First Amendment, the only thing you would be appealing to that I shouldn't is not the system, it's just your preference.